So we're here with Ceri Dingle, which is the director of the education charity Worldwrite and the online citizen TV channel Worldwrite. And Ceri, to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about how you set up the charity? Because I know it was set up back in 1994. Can you tell us a little bit about the story behind it and how you set up?
Well, I'd been running an anti-censorship art centre in Birmingham for my sins, which was great. You know, we put on all sorts of shows, and we'd got shut down for putting on a exhibition that really upset the council, which was about the Spanner case. It was about 14 S&M guys and they'd gone to prison for strange sexual practices that were consenting. And we put on an exhibition, art exhibition, about the whole thing, which caused a huge stir. I mean, it was an interesting exhibition. It was slightly grim, but nonetheless it was a real stand against censoriousness at the time. And we'd had a show called An Adoramus Horribilis, which was a great cartoon exhibition on the monarchy, and all sorts of quite exciting material we'd shown that people wouldn't normally get to see. But I think artists had really begun to get on my nerves, even though I come from an arts background, because we were all doing this on a voluntary basis, and it was, you know, darling, my work can't go there, and I need this, and I, me, and, you know, very up their own arse. And we'd run a couple of open submission exhibitions with school students, with young people, who were so much more interesting and willing and had a thirst for knowledge and didn't treat you like crap, that I became more interested in working with these young adults than artists who were doing my head in. And that's really how Worldwrite was born. We started off with a group of young people very interested in politics and running projects that were opposed to militarism and racism and challenging all sorts of backward ideas that really mattered at the time. And we ran our first exchange program overseas with Hiroshima, Japan in 1995, which was the 50th anniversary of the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we toured schools around the country, and we took a group out to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we learned an incredible amount about the racial thinking that had legitimised that kind of devastation, and the, you know, the idea put forward by Roosevelt that these were really locusts and therefore you could obliterate them. And that was an eye-opener, and Worldwrite became more important than the gallery, and we went from there, really.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the exchange programs? I know you mentioned Hiroshima, but what about Brazil? What about Ghana? And I also know that you, as a consequence of those exchange programs, you produced quite a few films that, you know, raised quite pertinent questions that I still think remain relevant today. But can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Sure. Well, firstly, as well as, you know, big things like the Hiroshima exchange, No More Hiroshimas campaign that we ran, we toured across Europe. We'd taken groups to Buchenwald and Auschwitz and looked at the Holocaust. We'd invaded the UN for its population control policies and its largely anti-development ideas, treating the developing world like children. So taking people to a developing country became quite an obvious next big step to make. So we took a group to the Amazon, effectively, and it was an amazing experience. We toured across 7 states, and you've got to remember Brazil is something like 44 times the size of France. It's huge, so we had all sorts of adventures and some incredible tales. But the main thing I think we learned was the extent to which in the West we have a very romantic view of nature and of the rainforest. And at the time it was an obsession here that to protect the forest, regardless of the lives of the people. And we met up with rubber tappers in the heart of the Amazon. We met people from about 14 different Indian tribes whose main mission really was to get out of the forest and, you know, learn Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, in order to trade and get a better life. Whereas Western NGOs and British anthropologists that were there were trying to preserve mother tongue, big up, you know, just tiny subsistence farming. Actual farmers and Indians didn't want to be treated like museum pieces. They wanted to enjoy life and with all its benefits, the same as everyone else. So they were busy digging up bits of the forest to put in runways, because the only way you can get in and out of the Amazon is by these little planes. You need to get someone to hospital or you get supplies. And the G8, as it was at the time, had their satellites on the forest and were busy blowing up runways to stop people developing and having a better life. And so for us, the first film we made, called Where Do People Fit In, really examined that obsession with the environment versus people. And it was at a time when the word sustainability was first put on the table. And we wrote and produced our first fat paper, an intervention if you like, as a charity with a campaigning aim called Time to Ditch the Sustainababble. And the whole notion that people's lives are somehow should be tied to nature. You know, we are somehow fortunate to be on the planet and we should worship it, rather than seeing nature for what it is, red in tooth and claw, and something that our development is crucial, both in fact to make the planet a better place and for our own lives. And so we were very, very critical of green thinking, of NGOs, of the kind of pity fest directed at the developing world, all of which tend to keep people in their place and do very few favours for us anywhere in the world. So the Brazil exchange was a big one, then Ghana, and it was really probably out of Ghana and the Ghana exchange that our slogan Ferraris for All emerged, because again it was that idea that and recognition that people should have the best. I'm not a big fan of fast cars because I'm terrified. But I absolutely support the aspiration for people having the best. And I know that upset a lot of greenery, and it also challenged that idea of sort of only the elite should have these kind of things. And for our peers in Ghana who want fast cars, white goods, a good life, piped water, not wells, amidst the celebration of what they call sustainability, which generally means crap, less than $1 a day, subsistence life, basic needs, you know, tie-dyeing and drawing water at the well, we wanted to put people's real aspirations on the map. And our peers in Ghana, of course, are no different from us. Everybody wants an easier life and, you know, to do all the sorts of things and have the opportunities that we have in the West. So we made a series of films from that first Ghana exchange onwards, and I went back to Ghana quite a lot of times. And we made, I think, 7 films in all. But the main series were called Pricking the Missionary Position. and they're still really pertinent. One's down by debt relief, I'm a subsistence farmer, get me out of here, think big about people really making it, which is never, the story never told, and keeping Africa small, a kind of quite stinging critique of NGOs' approach to the developing world and to not just Ghana and West Africa but to that continent as a whole, which is that they are all these children effectively that can't do without us. And that vulnerability paradigm, obviously, even though this is many years ago now, more than 15 years ago, our last exchange program, that vulnerability paradigm is now everywhere here in the West. And it's interesting because I remember it was either Oxfam or Save the Children, and both of who tend to go down this road, refocusing the idea of vulnerability as something that affects all of us, so that we all become these pathetic, whimpering, needy species, incapable of really doing that much, and certainly not changing the world.
But following up from that, I know that Worldwrite produced a very controversial film on fair trade that I think they tried to shut it down. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Yeah, we were actually working with an Irish partner group who were terrific, who were also going out to Ghana, and we worked together to on a film idea which some of the youngsters shot on fair trade, because we were really concerned at the time, you know, I mean, fair trade is so mainstream and, you know, they get millions, really. But fair trade at its heart is about seeing the sort of small-time coffee, cocoa and elsewhere, you know, banana growers, that's kind of small-scale, hand-to-mouth existence as something worth promoting and celebrating. And, you know, so on the cocoa farm in Ghana, for example, one of the, they're all cooperatives, cooperative farmers was asked what he thought the prospects were for Ghanaians involved. He said, I can't think of a single country that's ever made it staying as a farm. And of course that's true. You look around the world and yes, you know, you have the, you know, agriculture, the green revolution in India that put things on a different plane. But most people have made it actually not having a hand-to-mouth existence, getting off the land. And of course in the West everyone wants to get back on the land. And, you know, fair trade sort of worships that kind of existence, and it puts, the more we looked at it, the more shocking it is, puts really stringent conditions too on what farmers can and can't do. Can't use pesticides, for example. Well, you know, if there weren't these ridiculous regulations and the risk hysteria about pesticides, I can tell you now, millions would not have died of malaria across the developing world, for example. You know, the malaria-carrying mosquito in parts of the world, in America and elsewhere, were wiped out through the use of things like DDT, which was banned simply because of some prejudice about birds' eggshells. Well, think about the millions who needn't have died if DDT hadn't got banned, which now even the World Health Organization has had to admit is not harmful to human health. Shocking, absolutely shocking. The fair trade have these sort of obsessions, no pesticides, and when we approach them back here and ask them about their attitude to mechanisation, they looked, and you can see it in the film, and it's worth watching the film. It's on our website and on YouTube. It's called The Bitter Aftertaste. And we asked them about mechanisation. They said, oh, well, we don't really have a policy, we don't really know anything about that. And it's so shocking. You know, without mechanisation, really what you're supporting is hand labour. toil, absolute toil, and therefore poverty, effectively, for lots of small farmers. And when you talk to people who are doing the hand weeding and ask them, and it's all in the film, what do you want for your kids? What do you expect? They say, I want them to go to university. I don't want them to have to do this. Which is what, of course, parents all over the world don't want their kids to have a hand-to-mouth existence. Why would they, or should they? So that was a film that took apart fair trade and the very idea that Westerners' shopping baskets, which is not even true, somehow determine the lives of people in the developing world. So if you're like me and you shop at Lidl or Asda or Netto or Primark, somewhere where it's cheap, as we all do, most of us do, then you're somehow bad because you're not buying the organic fair trade produce. It's actually a lie. It's not even telling Western consumers the truth. That what there is really needed in those countries is massive investment, which allows people to get off the land.
Wow, that sounds good. But what about, so I know that gradually you stopped organising those two-way youth exchange programs and you evolved towards film more and more over the years, and then you set up Worldwrite, the online citizen TV channel. Can you explain why that happened and why did you decide to set up the citizen TV channel?
Well, I think we'd already, as I've mentioned, made quite a few films that are still relevant now, but exchanges themselves became harder and harder. There was even a youth exchange czar. Every time there's a problem, the government will appoint usually some celebrity, but a czar. What a bizarre idea. That's going to solve it all. And no doubt there'd been a couple of problems on some exchanges or something. But what it meant was that if you were taking young people out of the UK, and you can see how that sort of cotton wool kids thing begins to come into play more and more, you had to go to wherever they were and do a risk assessment of people's homes. Totally absurd. So, what were you supposed to do? Go into a mud hut in Ghana and do a risk assessment and say what? Yes, it's shit. And people want out of it. Yeah. So it became more and more, considered problematic. It became harder and harder to raise funds to do that kind of thing. It became harder and harder to work with under 18s, and very difficult if you were placing people in what they call homestays, to stay with families in the developing world or elsewhere because of the sort of paedophile panic. So you had the coming together of all sorts of panics which made it hard for taking young people out. All panics worth challenging, but you couldn't practically do it through just running an exchange. And probably even more importantly, it became more and more difficult to bring people into the UK. Because contrary to a lot of public thinking, for most of the world, Britain's borders have become more and more shut down. And Fortress Europe, as we know, lets people drown in the Mediterranean. But prior to that, stopped all sorts of free movement for people, and we couldn't bring in the inappropriate poor people that we were linked up with. And I even had letters saying they're inappropriate people. In other words, they're not rich. And we weren't prepared to run exchange programs that were one way, because it's bullshit. They're not exchanges. And there's loads of those things around, your gap year experience and your, all of that, most of which are nonsense, really. You go over like, I think Prince William did, somewhere or other, and you build a boardwalk as though local people haven't been doing that for hundreds of years and know better than you. but you go there and you have this incredible, you know,
experience to find themselves, right?
Find yourself and feel sorry for the natives and help them, because what? And then what, invite them back to the palace? Yeah, right. No, of course not. So that they can come and, what, clean your silver or something. Anyway, it became more and more difficult, and we weren't running those kind of exchanges. We were running what I would call truth trips. And the report backs were really important, so film became an obvious way to tell the story, tell the truth of what we'd all learned, and you all learn. And but it became very, very hard to pull off. And Britain's border controls, which in our view have always sucked, Worldwrite has opposed immigration controls since it set up, became much more difficult. And so film was the obvious shift, really, and evolution. So then we started just making films, and became really obvious that no one was going to commission us to do anything because they didn't like what we were saying. Because there's, you know, TV's expanded massively and there's hundreds of channels and everyone's looking for content. But there's a certain kind of cut-off point in terms of they want critical voices, they want, you know, oppositional politics, they want people to challenge things, but not that much, not too much. And certainly not, that's not where the money's going to go. And so we launched our own channel, our own citizen TV channel, so that really we could go fingers to you. We're going to make what we want to make. And we created a channel in a way which could go on involving young people. They could raise their concerns and ideas, and they might not agree with me. But we could create a kind of collective brain to really try and stand up for simple principles: growth, development, freedom, civil liberties, free speech, and open borders, absolutely. And probably today, most crucially, democracy and a belief in people and our capacity to make change. Because it's now very trendy, of course, to, you know, whether you sign a petition on change.org or you get a change makers grant, or all of these things that are supposedly encouraging young people to change things, but they mean mostly what's meant is at a very local, very parochial level. You know, plant some flowers, you know, moan about a street light, yeah, get the car parking out of your road. And I think there's a lot of young people who have got far greater ambitions and aspirations than that and want to see a better world. And I know that's true. And they keep coming back for more. And so we keep teaching them now how to use cameras, all the basics. And we have lots of political and interesting and challenging discussion programs. And we've developed whole formats that really are about lots of people in front of the camera and lots of people behind the camera. And we focus on issues and ideas that the mainstream won't cover.
I mean, free film training is quite rare though in London, isn't it? You know, why is that important for us as a charity to provide the training for free? But also, how do you think people can get involved? Can you let everyone know how everyone can get involved?
Everyone can get involved. Anyone can get involved. Just visit our website, www.worldbites, B-Y-T-E-S, worldbites.org, and hit free TV training or become a volunteer. And it's all there. And you can find out about our work, and there's over 1,000 programs that we've made. Many of them stand the test of time, well worth watching. But we, specifically as a charity, we provide the training and the challenges that we do to 16 to 25-year-olds, but we encourage older people to get involved. And I think there is a kind of bit of a generational rift that needs to be challenged. And we saw that in a recent period with Brexit, you know, quite backward ideas about old people, you know, maybe their vote shouldn't count so much because they're not going to be there.
They're going to die soon, right?
They're going to die, I mean, really, really backward. And, you know, there are certain the things that we really do need to challenge. And at the moment, it would be great if more people want to get involved, because it's I think, a key moment in British history, and that Brexit has given us. There's a kind of glimmer there where a lot of people can see who, you know, like me, voted for Brexit, that you can stick two fingers up to the elite, you can have a more internationalist perspective, and you can see the limits which the EU represent, and so does a lot of UK politics. A real challenge to that idea that it should all happen behind closed doors, rather than we, the people, calling the shots. And there's a real glimmer there of hope there, and you can see how on the back foot the establishment are in relation to Brexit. So it's a great time to come and make programmes and think about the world more broadly and what we're capable of. You know, if we can keep ramming home that we decide, we should shape our own future, we should have the say in what happens. That's the only basis on which we can have a better society, because we're the people who make and do everything. And it isn't your, you know, cut-off elite that will ever make things really as prosperous as we'd like.
But we can't forget that the charity also has long-term projects. I mean, we just finished Every Cook Can Govern, a documentary on CLR James, but we also done Sylvia Pinecast, Everything's Possible, a few years ago, which was very well received. So can you tell us a little bit more about those two projects and others that we do on the side, as well as doing the, you know, the short reports that we tend to do?
Well, we film a lot of short reports, we film a lot of debates, we film a lot of news programmes, a lot of discussion programmes, and every 6 weeks we take a new group of people who want to learn camera and sound and lighting and have a go on the streets and all be part of a discussion programme. But we also have longer term documentary projects. So as Marisa's just mentioned, we spent nearly 6 years making a really big fat documentary on the Trinidadian born revolutionary CLR James, very famous for his book Black Jacobins, which told the truth about the slave revolts in Haiti. And as opposed to the West's idea that it was Wilberforce and British aristocrats who ended slavery. And, you know, very incredible text, incredible guy. And it's a really big job to tell his story. And that's great. It's gone into lots of festivals, and we've shown it all over the place. It's got, you know, screened in cinemas in London, and it hopefully will get shown a lot more and stand the test of time, because we've got original archive that no one had ever seen of him. We managed to get our hands on, and it's a very compelling historical essay through the mouths of people who, with 200 volunteers and 6 years of studying, we managed to find who I think best exemplified and were able to explain what he was about and why, as a history maker, he was important. And prior to that, our other film, and there's lots more films, but our film on the East End heroine Sylvia Pankhurst is well worth watching, because people, you know, Emmeline Pankhurst has got her statue outside the House of Lords and is sort of celebrated as this heroine, and actually it's her daughter Sylvia who's far more important, who was a rebel, who was in prison more than anyone else, on hunger strike, was chased all over the place. She was a communist, true internationalist, part of the Communist International in fact, and led a working class fight in the East End for universal suffrage, because actually not even all men had the vote.
So it was based on property, right?
Yeah, because it was based on property. And unlike her mother, who really wanted the vote for upper class women, Sylvia saw the working class as a real force for change. And the delegations she led on Parliament had a massive impact, and I think freaked them out, actually. And I think she's far more critical in winning the vote for all in 1928. And there's lots of other remarkable things she did that are well worth watching the film. And Sylvia Pankhurst, Everything is Possible.
And they're both available to buy online,
yeah,
right?
they're both available online. We've made them as cheap as possible. You can screen them anywhere. And if you want a speaker, you just have to ideally pay our transport, because we're so broke and life's hard. We can come and speak about the film or do a Q&A, which are always quite exciting and fun to do.
So, but just to end, but also to go a step back, because you were talking about Brexit earlier, and how that was a sort of a mark from last year. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is the focus of the charity at the moment? Is it Brexit? Is it democracy? Is it all those issues that you were raising earlier? Yeah.
Excuse me. Well, it is. I mean, we cover a kind of very wide range of issues, but this year, I think quite rightly, we've put a real focus on democracy, and we've shot various discussion programmes, and young people who've worked with us have raised all sorts of concerns. Sometimes they've only ever heard, one argument. I mean, last year we shot programmes which encourage young people to put serious questions on the map about the EU. And it's interesting that being in London, you find the Remain capital of the UK. Nonetheless, there are quite a lot of young people who can see that there's something afoot here, there's something going on. And it's important we encourage that spirit of questioning and challenge the contempt for our peers, because there is real contempt, as though the whole of the North is this racist shithole of xenophobes, which is absolute rubbish. There are plenty of people like me, perfectly normal, who have never had any time for the EU and aren't going to bottle it because somebody tries to call you a racist, which is outrageous. Absolutely not. And we're not going to let an institution like the EU, which has done so much to remove politics behind closed doors, even allow our politicians an excuse for so many things. Oh, it's not us, it's the EU. And they set it, they're part of it.
But it's a myth, isn't it, that the EU kind of promotes solidarity between the countries?
Oh, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. It's a very elite project that keeps politics from people. And to reclaim politics, which, Brexit is part of, it's very, very important. So making progress about democracy, we recently hit the streets locally in Hackney to find out what people thought about abolishing the House of Lords. We've got rid of the EU, now let's get rid of some of these anti-democratic institutions closer to home. We've got a really positive response, actually, even in, Remain London. Lots of people could see that this is a real medieval anachronism and shocking. And maybe just because it's, they get their £300 expenses every day and food served in white gloves and live the life of Riley and do nothing. But more than anything else, because actually it demeans, our capacity to have our say, and it isn't about, people say to you, oh, we need checks and balances. But things like the House of Lords have never been about checking the power of, say, corrupt or fraudulent MPs. It's always been about checking the power of the electorate. That's what those, and why those institutions developed and are there, and they absolutely have to go. And I think that's the next thing we need to fight for. So we're making programmes which address that and the lack of democracy. And of course it is entirely within our charities' wherewithal and objects, in fact, to advance the interests of citizens, help young people to understand politics properly, and that means reading and questioning and thinking and criticising and making judgments, which is very untrendy, and to put democracy on the map with no qualification ifs or buts.
So thank you so much, Ceri, for spending this time with us and telling us a little bit more about the charity. Can you just repeat once more how people can get involved with the charity so that no one forgets?
If you are interested in making challenging programmes, in questioning the status quo, or even just finding out a bit about filmmaking, then you need to come and get involved with us. And it won't cost you anything except your time and your passion and your interest. And you just need to visit www.worldwrites.org.